Welcome to the Outthinkers podcast. Plug into fascinating minds and breakthrough ideas that are transforming industries and the world. I'm your host, Kyan Krippendorf, founder of Outthinker Networks, a global think tank comprised of corporate strategists, innovators, and entrepreneurs that are shaping the future of business. If this describes you, join us at outthinker.com. Now, let's dive into this week's episode.
That's what pricing is. Each time we exchange money, there's a price. And the price is designed for people to trust that the exchange is a fair one. That's what the role of prices is. And that applies to wages, that applies to taxes, that applies to any time some amount of money is paid by someone to someone else. There's a price behind.
That was Jean-Manuel Izaret, or JMI, as he often prefers to go by. He is a BCG managing director and senior partner and the global leader of the marketing, sales, and pricing practice based in San Francisco. His work as a BCG Fellow focuses on the topic of pricing model transformation. JMI has worked on pricing issues across industries, including consumer goods, retail, high-tech, financial services, and industrial goods. As you heard in the highlighted clip, JMI has a talent for condensing the intricate and vast topic of pricing into clear, simple concepts that any business person can apply. His book, Game Changer: How Strategic Pricing Shapes Businesses, Markets, and Society, released just this October 2023 and co-authored with Arnab Sinha, was written with the mission to flip the flawed and clichéd conversations surrounding pricing to an approach that promises winning strategies for greater and fairer value to the buyer and seller and to society at large. In this conversation, we dive into topics around pricing, including his concept of the strategic pricing hexagon, a framework that enables decision makers to formulate a clear pricing strategy and shape their business and markets with authority using 7 logical and distinct pricing games. The top decisions people often get wrong about pricing and how you can avoid them. How to choose what unit to charge by and how this choice has the power to change your entire business model. And he illustrates it nicely through a simple case of the way in which we buy, lease, and hire cars. 3 trends that have changed pricing models and how you can use these to your advantage. And a bonus, interesting historical take on tipping and how this originated and evolved in various parts of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, JMI.
JMI, thank you so much for being here with us. It is great. We've been trying to, since we found your book, we've been trying to get you on the podcast, and we're very grateful that you've been able to take the time to talk to us. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Kai. I'm grateful too.
Lovely. Where are you sitting right now?
I am in San Francisco. So I live in the Bay Area and in Berkeley, to be more precise. So that's where I live.
Great. Oh, okay, great. How long have you been in California?
Only 24 years.
Oh, wow, just got there. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yep. Great. So there are 2 questions that I open up the podcast with that are kind of standard questions for everyone. The first one is just for us to get to know you a little bit personally. It may have nothing to do with your work at all and completely sense for me. If you really know me, you know that. How would you complete that sentence?
That if you come to our house in the mountains on the weekend, I will ask your kids to do some math no matter what. And it doesn't depend on the age, whether kids are 4 years old or 18 years old. We have a tradition where, whether for 2 minutes or for an hour, we'll have with each of the kids a little bit of a discussion about fun math stuff and helpful things they can think about from a mathematical standpoint. I love this, and it's always fun to surprise people with how much fun they can have with math. And in some ways, that ties a little bit to this book, where people think about pricing as just a numbers game, and I'm trying to help people see that there is more than just numbers when setting up prices.
I love that. That's where I want to go into, because I think that numbers shapes reality. And from what I've read of you is how you price something kind of puts yourself into a mental category in your consumer's mind of what you are. And so I really appreciate that in how you've kind of broken down the options for pricing. Second question, you're a strategist. You advise companies around the world on strategy. We've had many of the most leading thought leaders on strategy on this podcast. And we ask the same question. I always get a different answer. So whatever you give me is the right answer. What is your definition of strategy?
It is understanding deeply your value propositions to your customers, how it differs from the alternatives, your competition, and harnessing your cost structure in order to deliver the most value to the most people the fastest possible.
I like that. Delivering the most value to the most people as fast as possible. I love it. Great. So let's dig in. I mean, we don't have enough time to do everything, to do justice to your work. And we're going to, at the end, encourage people to buy the book and find you and learn from you. But let's try to give them a few things that would be valuable that they can start applying and start shaping their view of pricing strategy. So my first question is, what do people most often get wrong when they're thinking about their pricing strategy?
They mostly get wrong the fact that they think about this as a tactical exercise to define a number. And while it is that, the same way, tactically speaking, you need to define what's the price you're going to charge. But before you charge any price, you need to determine what you're selling, how you're selling it, and what is the unit by which you define the price. And the unit by which you define the price used to not be an issue. Think 150 years ago when modern economics were invented. You were selling coal by the ton, you were selling products by the products. But as we went into a world that is much more virtual and with digital goods, because there is no marginal cost to many goods, the unit by which you sell can be a much broader choice. And as you could see, software could be sold as a perpetual license or as a term license, could be sold per user, could be sold per location, could be sold per any other things you can imagine. We saw this in the music business, where we went from selling music by the CD and the album to now we sell it by the song. So that was a first change. But today we sell it by the month. It's a subscription, right? And all of these changes of the pricing unit tend to also translate into a changes of business model. And therefore, there is a tie between what unit you use to price what you sell with what business model you have to succeed in the marketplace.
So just to bring it to something that every general human would relate to, I'm thinking you immediately, I know you talk a lot about Netflix pricing. What I'm kind of hearing you say is, hey, Blockbuster was renting a DVD, a physical DVD per day or something, and then Netflix switched that to a per month pricing. It sounds like a minute change, but it changed the business model.
That's right. It was selling a movie for a few days, per movie per 2 or 3 days as a rental. And it became a per month charge for any movie you want. So we changed both the unit and what was sold, the offer itself.
Yes. Because now then you're elevating or changing the customer's perception of what they're buying from a movie to a service or access or something.
That's right. I have access to a library of movies and I can watch them whenever I want. And I don't have the constraints of returning them and all that. So it's a different business.
Yep. So how do you think about if the pricing unit influences what people think they're buying? How do you approach that when you do your, say, pricing strategy, consulting engagements? How do you think about what is the right unit that we want people to think about?
Well, you think about the unit that is the most correlated with the value you create. And sometimes there are subtle changes in the marketplace or in what you do that require that you change the units by which you price. Let me give you first, an example of this changes over time about in each industry about pricing units. You started with cars sold by the car, and then you could sell the car by the month, and that's leasing. And then you could sell a car by the day, and that's a rental car. And then you could sell a car by the mile plus the time you spend in the car. That's a taxi cab. And then you could sell a car by the ride, and that's Uber and Lyft coming on the scene and inventing an entire new market. If you think about the world of healthcare, you tend to sell healthcare by the treatment or by the patient, if you wish, right? Sometimes you could translate that into per pill, but when it's a cure of a disease, there's an infectious disease, and you have an interest, let's say you have a healthcare system that you manage across the country into curing everybody of a particular disease in your country, why do you pay per patient? Why not pay for the entire population, right? And if it's going to take 10 years to cure everybody, why, instead of paying per patient today, don't you pay for the entire population over the next 10 years and spread the payments? Because the value that you will get is people will get less sick over time, and you're going to save the money you're going to spend in less hospital cost over time. And that's the idea of, for an infectious disease like hepatitis C, a model that would be for all patients in a particular population insured by an insurer, for instance, or a country, and over time would be a better model than pricing it per patient. Because you would never have the question about, for that particular patient, is it worth it? Because you often have situations where some patients for hepatitis C that will get a liver transplant, if I can avoid a liver transplant 2 or 3 years from now, it's worth a lot of money. So the price should be really high. But hepatitis C develops over decades, and some patients might not have any symptom for more than a decade or so. And so therefore, the cost of treating them is zero. But they're still infectious and they can transmit the disease. As a population, you want to avoid people being sick, even though the cost of treating them is really zero. So the marginal cost of, is it worth it to do it now, seems like zero. If you have any price above, a few $100s, would be too expensive. And this is why, because we price per patient, and we invented a cure to hepatitis C more than 10 to 12 years ago, and we still haven't cured everybody, because any price per patient is the wrong price per patient.
Yes. So this diverges me from the questions that I was planning on asking. My question is, so we have the unit of pricing, but we also have who pays. Because in the example that you give me, there are certain, say, externalities, or there are certain agents that are going to incur the cost of having a sick person later, and they're not the person that pays initially. So how do you incorporate that into your model?
Well, you have that very frequently. If we go out from the really special case of the healthcare, which is a very complicated market to go into, right? But even for little toys for kids, the value is to the kids and the payer is the parents, right? And so you have to take into account, both sides, which is why parents are willing to pay more for games that are both fun and educative, right? And so that basically gives the two sides, and you need to serve both markets. You have, Facebook is famously an advertising business, where the payer pays and the users of Facebook don't pay anything. And so Facebook needs to pay a lot of attention to the value they create for advertisers, not only for the value they create for their users.
Yeah, so that's another dimension of the business model, in that the unit says what business you're in, but also who pays can say, I'm a media company because the advertiser's paying, or I'm a service because the user's paying. That can completely change your whole product.
And so here you just highlighted that these are the unit at which you pay and who pays are two examples of decisions that are really important pricing decisions that people tend to underestimate. And the offer of what you pay for is also one that people see as something completely independent from the pricing decisions. Let me decide what product I want to offer. And then when I know what I want to offer, I will decide what price I want to charge it for. And we had this, I think my first experience where I experienced that was a software company more than 15 years ago that came 3 months before the launch. And they said, hey, how should we price this product? What's the number? And we started to study the customer base and who they were useful for. And we found that there were basically two populations: a population of people who would create some content and a population that would consume the content. The value is very different from the two populations. They could have developed two different pieces of software targeted to these two different segments and have two different price points. But since it was all bundled into one single piece of code that was going to ship just a few months from then, there was no choice about how to change the price and how to change the offer, And therefore, there was no good pricing strategy for that product because they missed to take into account the pricing strategy when they designed the product.
Got it. Why did you correct yourself just now? You said instead of price, you said offer.
The offer is the counterpart to the price you charge, right? So they didn't think enough about designing the offer simultaneously to the pricing strategy. So for any company out there, think about bringing the strategy of your pricing simultaneously to the strategy of your product. When you think about what are the offers, what are the customers we're targeting, what are we trying to accomplish with these customers, how we're trying to serve them, you should often think about who of these customers get the most value, and therefore, are we going to package the product in a way that is going to serve the different customer segments in the right way and offer a lineup of product that will really align with the different prices and different segments, all of that being designed simultaneously.
I got you. Yep. That makes sense that they're intimately integrated.
They're tight, right?
Okay. So you're the head of BCG's pricing strategy practice. You've been in pricing for many years now. What has changed? And just kind of as a leading question, there's one of our chief strategy officer members. She's a former BCG person, as you are, and she works for a company that sells medicines. I'll be very vague. Medicines for farms, and they're looking at adopting an outcome-based approach rather than selling. So it seems that some things of technologies or some other things have changed that allow us to price differently. For example, on outcome, on subscription. What has changed now versus, say, 10 years ago?
There's a few changes I would mention. First, a lot of the most innovative value propositions and offers have very little or no marginal cost. Therefore, you have the degrees of freedom I was mentioning earlier, which is you could choose your pricing basis. When your product were cornflakes, you could sell it by the flake or sell it by the box, but you still had the marginal cost of the flake and it was roughly in proportion. So it was hard to reinvent your pricing model there, although you could think about that. But with digital goods, it's right in front of you. You can absolutely do that. So therefore, you think about, well, do I price based on what it's got to cost me to deliver? Which, when the marginal costs are zero, is very little. And so, well, the price should be freemium models, right? Or should I price based on the outcome? I'm creating a lot of value. This outcome is going to deliver money for my clients. I need to get a chunk of that money. Isn't that a fair exchange? Absolutely, it is a fair exchange, right? So that's the first category of changes. When marginal costs come to zero, you have more degrees of freedom about how you price. Second, think about inequality. Inequality of income, inequality of wealth. That means that for the same products, you tend to have more variation in the willingness to pay for different customers. So what people are willing to pay for the same thing has tended to diverge more than it used to be. And so therefore, you need to have an ability to vary your prices more, or this is again, something you can take advantage of that was not there before. Third big change is with more and more data about who the consumers are and more ability to target them at any point in time, anywhere, you have the ability to set prices in a very fine way, customer by customer, opportunity by opportunity, which is the trend of dynamic pricing. And that is also enabled by not only the data, but the fact that we now have algorithms that are more and more sophisticated about how to set prices. And so computing power combined with data allows with AI machines to set prices in a more variable way than it used to be.
Fascinating. Right. And I guess you could apply that to your first point and also say that digital products, you can customize them probably also more finely than before, so that you can take your stack of value and you can combine them to create a more customized value proposition.
That's right. So these three trends all work together so that the paradigm of pricing from 50 years ago was the same price for everybody. The paradigm of pricing that has emerged over the past 20 years and continues to emerge is different prices for different people at different times for different offers. And that's why this is a topic that has become more and more interesting over time.
Fascinating. I have so many more questions, and you're just opening up more questions on my list, but I know we're reaching the top of our time with you. So I'm going to ask just two more questions and then encourage people to find you and follow you and read your book. Do you mind just, I don't know if you can do this succinctly, laying out for us your Hexagon pricing model? Like when I think of pricing, I think of there's cost-based pricing, there's value-based pricing, there's competition-based pricing.
That's right. And we are saying in our book that there's 4 more types of pricing. At the intersection of cost and value, there's elasticity-based pricing. It's the pricing where you set your price, it's a uniform price, everybody pays that price, and you're trying to optimize that price. That's what the kind of pricing that everybody learned in Econ 101. But there's another type of pricing that doesn't depend on the elasticity. Imagine you have very few number of very large customers, and you have 2 or 3 providers that can provide a particular offer. So elasticity is irrelevant because you don't have the statistics of going up or down. It's negotiation by negotiation. Game theory gives you the answer, right? And so that's the combination of what are my costs and what are my competitors' costs, and what are my competitors going to do. The outcome of my price is if my competitor lowers his price, I will lower my price to get the deal. Then he lowers again, then I lower again, then the third lowers again. And when someone stops is where the prices get set, right? And so the game theory is the way prices are set in that particular situation. And then you have a third intersection about value pricing versus competition pricing, which is what we call choices. And that's where the psychology of people that decide between you and your competitor, but also between the different offers that we talked about. So when we talked about the lineup of choices that I'm offering to my customers, in that context, think about Starbucks. If I set the prices wrong or a little bit too high on a particular product, the person who walked into Starbucks is going to buy something slightly different, but still in Starbucks. They came with friend. It's expensive. I can't afford that much. I will lower down. Or I'm feeling good today. Let's celebrate and let's have this pumpkin skies that I've been thinking about, right? And so that's the different types of what we call a pricing game from the 3 others. So we started with 3, your cost, value, competition. I added 3 at the intersections, which are the 3 in the, and there's one in the middle, which is dynamic pricing, which combines everything together, right? And this is where airlines are pricing and everything moves all the time and it gets complicated. The rules about what you need to think in each of these games and the way you calculate the numbers that you will charge are really different from one game to the other. And people tend to underestimate. So in the business world, people have understood for quite a while now, say 30 years, that they need to go from not pricing based on cost and price based on value, right? But very often people try to price based on value and they can't succeed doing that. And they're wondering, well, we didn't do it right. Well, you can only price on value if nobody does what you do. If someone does what you do really well and have other options, then competition comes into play.
Right, because as a consumer, your choice is this or nothing. And then as long as this is a little bit less than the value I get, then I will be able to
That's right.
be willing.
And pricing to just what the market is usually a bad idea because you just follow the market. So that's the right answer if you're a really small company. But if you're a large company and you can frame the choices for your customers, then why wouldn't you do that? And you let customers that have more money pay the most expensive products and you invest in advertising to make them believe this is really a fantastic product.
Right.
And
right.
So we go into the choice game.
Fascinating. Yeah. I wanted to go here, but I know we don't have time to go into it. But I think that a dynamic approach to pricing, which maybe has been more in the realm of B2B pricing, now can also apply to B2C pricing. We can have more customized
That's right.
pricing approaches.
And you see that, and that carries a lot of risks as well as a lot of benefits. So you could see that airlines have been pricing in a dynamic way. All prices are different for every seat at every point in time. But concert tickets with Ticketmaster have started to vary very much. And they varied so much that they pissed off everybody. And then Congress got involved.
And Taylor Swift got involved.
That's right. And she had different ideas and so on. And I think it's fair to have this mechanism where you try different pricing models and then the public and the customers are pushing back and saying, this is too much, this is right, and so on. This is something we see today with tipping. right? With the advance of being able to decide how much tip you want to give for service workers on an iPad that you have to choose.
When I go buy a muffin and I can type in what, yep.
That's right. You have transformed tipping from an analog thing when you were deciding how much you were giving, scribbling on a piece of paper or leaving some money in a jar. That was an individual decision you were making. Now it becomes a public decision where there's a choice framed for you. And when that choice is framed for you and the math is done for you, guess what? People happen to choose the option in the middle, which 15, 20, 25, 20 in the middle, people tend to choose the middle option. And 20% is now calculated rigorously. And it turns out that on average, all small businesses tend to make a little more money when they use that way of pricing, right? And you could see a lot of articles and people are pushing back on that. I don't want to pay for tipping at my orthodontist.
Right.
Is that right? So we have a change in the pricing process for tipping that went from analog to digital. That change went to the benefits of the businesses for 2 or 3 years. During COVID, everybody wanted to support the small businesses, so that was great. But now we are coming out of that and there's inflation and people need to think about how much they spend where. And there's a pushback on that. And that's a normal market equilibrium. What is really interesting is observing how some fundamental changes about how the prices are set are more important than the price numbers. Eventually, we will get to what is the right price to tip. But I don't think the iPad is going to disappear as a way for you to choose how much you want to tip.
I got you. Yes. And then this is a very random question. I know we're over time with you, but you having grown up or lived a lot of your life in Europe, why is it that in Europe, is tipping culture changing in Europe?
So you have not as much pushback in Europe as you have in the US. And partially it is also because the US has a guilty relationship with tipping. And I happen to have looked a little bit about where that came from. So Americans are said to have taken the European tradition of tipping and thought it was a great idea. But it really became a big thing just after the Civil War. And it was at the time when a lot of businesses didn't want to have to pay their service workers, especially black ones, because out of slavery, they didn't have to pay anybody, right? And they decided there was a good idea to say the customers would have to pay for the service. And by forcing onto customers the decision about how much to pay service people, which you don't do in any other business, all the biases that customers have about who they prefer, how they prefer it, and so on, came into play into how much people were making. All right. So that meant, for instance, that there are more white people than black people as customers, right? In the US, we know people tend to pay more and towards people that look like them. So structurally, by deciding to get the customers to pay, it was the same decision as decided that white service workers would be paying more than black service workers.
Fascinating. But it wasn't them paying them more. It was the market.
The decision was made by the markets, right? And then all sorts of biases came in, not just the black versus white and Latinos and other cultures, but women versus men. You have more sexual harassment complaints in the restaurant industry than in many other industries. All of that coming from the fear of not being tipped and so on. So all these biases came from the original sin, if you wish, of deciding that the customers were going to pay for service.
Fascinating. Wow. That's your next book. I mean, if you can look at pricing of taxes and kind of, societal like money transfers broadly, wow, that would unpack a whole can of worms.
And that's what pricing is. Each time we exchange money, there's a price. And the price is designed for people to trust that the exchange is a fair one. That's what the role of prices is. And that applies to wages, that applies to taxes, that applies to any time some amount of money is paid by someone to someone else. There's a price behind.
Beautiful.
So,
yeah. Fascinating. Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. How can people connect with you? Certainly, they should buy your book, Game Changer. And how else can people stay in touch with you?
So easily accessible on LinkedIn. But if they remember JMI and the fact that I'm working at BCG, they can email me at jmi@bcg.com.
What? How'd you get that? That's great. JMI at BCG. Oh, that's perfect. That's perfect. Well, JMI, thank you so much for being here with us. It was such a pleasure, and I wish we had more time to dig in deeper, but there are those opportunities by connecting with you and by reading your book. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Kai. It's a pleasure.
Thank you to our guest. Thank you to our executive producer, Karina Reyes, our editor, Zach Ness, and the rest of the team. If you like what you heard, please follow, download, and subscribe. I'm your host, Kai Krippendorf. Thank you for listening. We'll catch you soon with another episode of Outthinkers.